The Velveteen Rabbit. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Jedopi. The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams. There was once a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy, as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink sateen. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking, with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in the stocking, nuts and oranges, and a toy engine, and chocolate almonds, and a clockwork mouse, but the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours the boy loved him, and then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels, and in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior, and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas, and pretended they were real. The model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them, and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself, and he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion, who was made by the disabled soldiers and should have had broader views, put on airs and pretended he was connected with government. Between them all, the poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and commonplace, and the only person who was kind to him at all was the Skin Horse. The Skin Horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away, and he knew that they were only toys and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced, like the Skin Horse, understood all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day, when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender, before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the Skin Horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the Skin Horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the Skin Horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." "I suppose you are real," said the rabbit, and then he wished he had not said it, for he thought the Skin Horse might be sensitive. But the Skin Horse only smiled. "The boy's uncle made me Real," he said. "That was a great many years ago. But once you are Real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always." The Rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called Real happened to him. He longed to become Real, to know what it felt like. And yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished that he could become it without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes, for no reason whatever, she went swooping about like a great wind and hustled them all away in cupboards. She called this tidying up, and the playthings all hated it, especially the tin ones. The Rabbit didn't mind it so much, for wherever he was thrown, he came down soft. One evening, when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for china dogs at bedtime, so she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. "Here," she said, "take your old bunny. He'll do to sleep with you." And she dragged the Rabbit out by one ear and put him into the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the Rabbit could scarcely breathe. And he missed, too, those long moonlight hours in the nursery, when all the house was silent, and his talks with the Skin Horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him, and made nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes that he said were like the burrows the real rabbits lived in. And they had splendid games together, in whispers, when Nana had gone away to her supper and left the night-light burning on the mantelpiece. And when the boy dropped off to sleep, the Rabbit would snuggle down close under his little warm chin and dream, with the boy's hands clasped close round him all night long. And so time went on, and the little Rabbit was very happy, so happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail becoming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the Rabbit went too. He had rides in the wheelbarrow and picnics on the grass, and lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea, the Rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk, and Nana had to come and look for him with the candle, because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet through with the dew and quite earthy from diving into the burrows the boys had made for him in the flower bed, and Nana grumbled as she rubbed him off with a corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. "Give me my bunny," he said. "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little Rabbit heard that he was happy, for he knew that what the Skin Horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot-button eyes, that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it next morning when she picked him up and said, "I declare if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived there was a wood, and in the long June evenings the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play at brigands among the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere among the bracken, where he would be quite cozy, for he was a kind-hearted little boy, and he liked Bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants that ran to and fro between his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall bracken near him. They were rabbits, like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same, like he did. Their feet patted softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them up, but he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "Oh," said the furry rabbit, "it's as easy as anything," and he gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I don't believe you can," he said. "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again. But the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked. "He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. "Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs!" And he began to laugh. "I have!" cried the little rabbit. "I have got hind legs. I'm sitting on them." "Then stretch them out and show me, like this," said the wild rabbit, and he began to whirl round and dance till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said. "I'd rather sit still." But all the while he was longing to dance, for a funny new tickly feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen Rabbit's ear, and then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "He doesn't smell right!" he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all! He isn't real!" "I am real!" said the little rabbit. "I am real! The boy said so!" and he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past them, and with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails the two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me!" called the little rabbit. "Oh, do come back! I know I am real!" But there was no answer. Only the little ants ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. "Oh, dear!" he thought. "Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken and hoping that they would come back. But they never returned, and presently the sun sank lower and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit any more, except to the boy. To him he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little Rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real, and when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then one day the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the Rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night, and through it all the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him someone might take him away, and he knew that the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little Rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day long. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and they would go out in the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books, while the little Rabbit cuddled close at his side. And one day they let him get up and dress. It was a bright, sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the boy out onto the balcony wrapped in a shawl, and the little Rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all, while the little Rabbit lay under the bedclothes, with just his head peeping out, and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in bed must be burnt. "Hooray!" thought the little Rabbit. "Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside." For the boy had often talked of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see the big waves coming in, and the tiny crabs, and the sand castles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about his old bunny?" she asked. "That?" said the doctor. "Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once." "What nonsense! Get him a new one. He mustn't have that any more." And so the little Rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. He had the potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush, with real glass eyes. But the boy wasn't too excited to care very much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he could think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little Rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so, by wriggling a bit, he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection to him. Near by he could see the thicket of raspberry canes, growing tall and close like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other, the fairy huts in the flower bed, the quiet evenings in the wood when he lay in the bracken and the little ants ran over his paws, the wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. he thought of the Skin Horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real, if it all ended like this? And a tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened, for where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground, a mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves, the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry, and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossom opened, and out of it there stepped a fairy. She was the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers round her neck and in her hair, and her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on his velveteen nose that was all damp from crying. "Little Rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her, and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. "I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. When they are old and worn out and the children don't need them any more, then I come and take them away with me and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy they all stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know in Rabbit Land, for he is going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved, for when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing around him he suddenly remembered about his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He did not know that when the fairy kissed him that last time she had changed him altogether, and he might have sat there a long time too shy to move if just then something hadn't tickled his nose, and before he thought what he was doing he lifted his hind toe to scratch it, and he found that he actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy velveteen he had brown fur, soft and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling round as the others did, and he grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look for the fairy, she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed, and winter, and in the spring, when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. And while he was playing, two rabbits crept out from the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted, and the spots still showed through. And about his little soft nose and his round black eyes there was something familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever." But he never knew that it really was his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. The End of the Velveteen Rabbit. Recording by Jedopi. www.publicdomainaudiobooks.blogspot.com. Rumpelstiltskin. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Jedopi. Rumpelstiltskin by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a poor miller who had a beautiful daughter, and one day, having to go to speak with the king, he said, in order to make himself appear of consequence, that he had a daughter who could spin straw into gold. The king was very fond of gold, and thought to himself, "That is an art which would please me very well." And so he said to the miller, "If your daughter is so very clever, bring her to the castle in the morning, and I will put her to the proof." As soon as she arrived, the king led her into a chamber which was full of straw, and giving her a wheel and a reel, he said, "Now set yourself to work, and if you have not spun this straw into gold by an early hour tomorrow, you must die." With these words he shut the room door, and left the maiden alone. There she sat for a long time, thinking how to save her life, for she understood nothing of the art whereby straw might be spun into gold, and her perplexity increased more and more, till at last she began to weep. All at once the door opened, and in stepped a little man, who said, "Good evening, fair maiden. Why do you weep so sore?" "Oh," she replied, "I must spin this straw into gold, and I'm sure I don't know how." The little man asked, "What will you give me if I spin it for you?" "My necklace," said the maiden. The dwarf took it, placed himself in front of the wheel, and whirr, 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 3 times round, and the bobbin was full. Then he set up another, and whirr, 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 thrice round again, and a second bobbin was full. And so he went all night long, until all the straw was spun, and the bobbins were full of gold. At sunrise the king came, very much astonished to see the gold, the sight of which gladdened him, but did not make his heart less covetous. He caused the maiden to be led into another room, still larger, full of straw, and then he bade her spin it into gold during the night, if she valued her life. The maiden was again quite at a loss what to do, but while she cried, the door opened suddenly as before, and the dwarf appeared and asked her what she would give him in return for his assistance. "The ring off my finger," she replied. The little man took the ring and began to spin at once, and by morning all the straw was changed to glistening gold. The king was rejoiced above measure at the sight of this, but still he was not satisfied. But, leading the maiden into another still larger room full of straw as the others, he said, "This you must spin during the night, but if you accomplish it you shall be my bride. For," thought he to himself, "a richer wife thou canst not have in all the world." When the maiden was left alone, the dwarf again appeared and asked for the third time, "What will you give me to do this for you?" "I have nothing left that I can give you," replied the maiden. "Then promise me your first-born child, if you become queen," said he. The miller's daughter thought, "Who can tell if that will ever happen?" and, ignorant how else to help herself out of her trouble, she promised the dwarf what he desired, and he immediately set about and finished the spinning. When morning came and the king found all he had wished for done, he celebrated his wedding, and the miller's fair daughter became queen. The gay times she had at the king's court caused her to forget that she had made a very foolish promise. About a year after the marriage, when she had ceased to think about the little dwarf, she brought a fine child into the world, and suddenly, soon after its birth, the very man appeared and demanded what she had promised. The frightened queen offered him all the riches of the kingdom if he would leave her child. But the dwarf answered, "No, something human is dearer to me than all the wealth of the world." The queen began to weep and groan so much that the dwarf pitied her, and said, "I will leave you 3 days to consider. If you in that time discover my name, you shall keep your child." All night long the queen racked her brains for all the names she could think of, and sent a messenger through the country to collect far and wide any new names. The following morning came the dwarf, and she began with Caspar, Melchior, Balthasar, and all the odd names she knew. But at each the little man exclaimed, "That is not my name." The second day the queen inquired of all her people for uncommon and curious names, and called the dwarf Ribs of Beef, Sheepshank, Whalebone. But at each he said, "This is not my name." The third day the messenger came back and said, "I have not found a single name, but as I came to a high mountain near the edge of a forest where foxes and hares say good night to each other, I saw there a little house, and before the door a fire was burning, and round this fire a very curious little man was dancing on one leg, and shouting, 'Today I stew, and then I'll bake. Tomorrow I shall the queen's child take. Ah, how famous it is that nobody knows that my name is Rumpelstiltskin.'" When the queen heard this she was very glad, for now she knew the name, and soon after came the dwarf and asked, "Now, my lady queen, what is my name?" First she said, "Are you called Conrad?" "No." "Are you called Hal?" "No." "Are you called Rumpelstiltskin?" "A witch has told you! A witch has told you!" shrieked the little man, and stamped his right foot so hard in the ground with rage that he could not draw it out again. Then he took hold of his left leg with both his hands and pulled away so hard that his right came off in the struggle, and he hopped away howling terribly. And from that day to this the queen has heard no more of her troublesome visitor. End of Rumpelstiltskin. Recording by Jedopi. www.publicdomainaudiobooks.blogspot.com.
The Story of the Three Little Pigs by Allerleirauh. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Rach. The Story of the Three Little Pigs by Allerleirauh. Once upon a time there was an old sow with 3 little pigs, and as she had not enough to keep them, she sent them out to seek their fortune. The first that went off met a man with a bundle of straw, and said to him, "Please, man, give me that straw to build me a house," which the man did, and the little pig built a house with it. Presently came along a wolf, and knocked at the door, and said, little pig, let me come in." To which the pig answered, "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. So he huffed, and he puffed, and he blew his house in, and ate up the little pig. The second pig met a man with a bundle of furs, and said, "Please, man, give me that furs to build a house," to which the man did, and the pig built his house. Then along came the wolf, and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll puff, and I'll huff, and I'll blow your house in." So he huffed, and he puffed, and he puffed, and he huffed, and at last he blew the house down, and ate up the second little pig. The third little pig met a man with a load of bricks, and said, "Please, man, give me those bricks to build a house with." So the man gave him the bricks, and he built his house with them. So the wolf came, as he did to the other little pigs, and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in." Well, he huffed, and he puffed, and he huffed, and he puffed, and he puffed, and he huffed, but he could not get the house down. When he found that he could not, with all his huffing and puffing, blow the house down, and said, "Little pig, I know where there is a nice field of turnips." "Where?" said the little pig. "Oh, in Mr. Smith's home field, and if you will be ready tomorrow morning, I will call for you, and we will go together and get some for dinner." "Very well," said the little pig, "I will be ready. What time do you mean to go?" "Oh, at 6 o'clock." Well, the little pig got up at 5, and got the turnips, and was home again before 6. When the wolf came, he said, "Little pig, are you ready?" "Ready," said the little pig. "I have been and come again, and got a nice pot full for dinner." The wolf felt very angry at this, but thought that he would be up to the little pig somehow or other. So he said, "Little pig, I know where there is a nice apple tree." "Where?" said the pig. "Down at Merry Garden," replied the wolf, "and if you will not deceive me, I will come for you at 5 o'clock tomorrow, and we will go together and get some apples." Well, the little pig woke at 4 the next morning, and bustled up and went off for the apples, hoping to get back before the wolf came, but he had farther to go, and had to climb the tree, so that just as he was coming down from it, he saw the wolf coming, which, as you may suppose, frightened him very much. When the wolf came up, he said, "Little pig, what? Are you here before me? Are they nice apples?" "Yes, very," said the little pig. "I will throw you down one." And he threw it so far that, when the wolf was gone to pick it up, the little pig jumped down and ran home. The next day the wolf came again, and said to the little pig, "Little pig, there is a fair in the town this afternoon. Will you go?" "Oh, yes," said the pig, "I will go. What time shall you be ready?" "At 3," said the wolf. So the little pig went off before the time as usual, got to the fair, and bought a butter churn, and was on his way home with it when he saw the wolf coming. Then he could not tell what to do, so he got into the churn to hide, and in doing so turned it around, and it began to roll, and rolled down the hill with the pig inside it, which frightened the wolf so much that he ran home without going to the fair. He went to the little pig's house, and told him how frightened he had been by a great round thing that came down the hill past him. Then the little pig said, "Ha! I frightened you, didn't I? I have been to the fair, bought a butter churn. When I saw you, I got into it, and it rolled down the hill." Then the wolf was very angry indeed, and declared he would eat up the little pig, and that he would get down the chimney after him. When the little pig saw what he was about, he hung on the pot full of water, made up a blazing fire, and, just as the wolf was coming down, took off the cover of the pot, and in fell the wolf. And the little pig put on the cover again, and in an instant boiled him up, and ate him for supper, and lived happily ever after. End of the story of the 3 little pigs.
The Traveling Musicians. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. Recording by Jedopi. The Traveling Musicians by the Brothers Grimm. An honest farmer had once an ass that had been a faithful servant to him a great many years, but was now growing old, and every day more and more unfit for work. His master, therefore, was tired of keeping him, and began to think of putting an end to him. But the ass, who saw that some mischief was in the wind, took himself slyly off, and began his journey towards the great city. "For there," thought he, "I may turn musician." After he had travelled a little way, he spied a dog lying by the roadside and panting as if he were tired. "What makes you pant so, my friend?" said the ass. "Alas," said the dog, "my master was going to knock me on the head, because I'm old and weak, and can no longer make myself useful to him in hunting. So I ran away. But what can I do to earn my livelihood?" "Hark ye," said the ass,
I am going to the great city to turn musician. Suppose you go with me and try what you can do in the same way."
The dog said he was willing, and they jogged on together. They had not gone far before they saw a cat sitting in the middle of the road and making a most rueful face.
"Pray, my good lady," said the ass, "what's the matter with you? You look quite out of spirits."
"Oh me," said the cat, "how can one be in good spirits when one's life is in danger? Because I'm beginning to grow old, and had rather lie at my ease by the fire than run about the house after the mice, my mistress laid hold of me and was going to drown me. And though I have been lucky enough to get away from her, I do not know what I am to live upon."
"Oh," said the ass, "by all means go with us to the great city. You are a good night singer, and may make your fortune as a musician."
The cat was pleased with the thought, and joined the party. Soon afterwards, as they were passing by a farmyard, they saw a cock perched upon a gate, and screaming out with all his might and main.
"Bravo!" said the ass. "Upon my word, you make a famous noise. Pray, what is all this about?"
"Why," said the cock, "I was just now saying that we should have fine weather for our washing day, and yet my mistress and the cook don't thank me for my pains, but threaten to cut off my head tomorrow and make broth of me for the guests that are coming on Sunday."
"Heaven forbid," said the ass. "Come with us, Master Chanticleer. It will be better at any rate than staying here to have your head cut off. Besides, who knows? If we care to sing in tune, we may get up some kind of a concert. So come along with us."
"With all my heart,"
said the cock.
So they all four went on jollily together. They could not, however, reach the great city the first day, so when night came on they went into a wood to sleep. The ass and the dog laid themselves down under a great tree, and the cat climbed up into the branches, while the cock, thinking that the higher he sat the safer he should be, flew up to the very top of the tree, and then, according to his custom, before he went to sleep, looked out on all sides of him to see that everything was well. In doing this, he saw afar off something bright and shining, and calling to his companion said,
"There must be a house no great way off, for I see a light."
"If that be the case," said the ass, "we had better change our quarters, for our lodging is not the best in the world."
"Besides," added the dog, "I should not be the worse for a bone or two, or a bit of meat." So they walked off together towards the spot where Chanticleer had seen the light, and as they drew near it became larger and brighter, till they at last came close to a house in which a gang of robbers lived. The ass, being the tallest of the company, marched up to the window and peeped in.
"Well, donkey," said Chanticleer, "what do you see?"
"What do I see?" replied the ass. "Why, I see a table spread with all kinds of good things, and robbers sitting round it making merry."
"That would be a noble lodging for us,"
said the cock. "Yes," said the ass, "if we could only get in."
So they consulted together how they should contrive to get the robbers out, and at last they hit upon a plan. The ass placed himself upright on his hind legs, with his forefeet resting against the window. The dog got upon his back, the cat scrambled up to the dog's shoulders, and the cock flew up and sat upon the cat's head. When all was ready, a signal was given, and they began their music. The ass brayed, "Hee-haw!" The dog barked, "Ruff, ruff!" The cat mewed, "Meow!" And the cock screamed, "Arr, arr, arr!" And then they all broke through the window at once, and came tumbling into the room, amongst the broken glass, with the most hideous clatter. The robbers, who had been not a little frightened by the opening concert, had now no doubt that some frightful hobgoblin had broken in upon them and scampered away as fast as they could. The coast once clear, our travellers soon sat down and dispatched what the robbers had left, with as much eagerness as if they had not expected to eat again for a month. As soon as they had satisfied themselves, they put out the lights, and each one more sought out a resting place to his own liking. The donkey laid himself down upon a heap of straw in the yard. The dog stretched himself upon a mat behind the door. The cat rolled herself up on the hearth before the warm ashes, and the cock perched upon a beam on the top of the house. And as they were all rather tired with their journey, they soon fell asleep. But about midnight, when the robbers saw from afar that the lights were out and that all seemed quiet, they began to think that they had been in too great a hurry to run away. And one of them, who was bolder than the rest, went to see what was going on. Finding everything still, he marched into the kitchen and groped about till he found a match in order to light a candle. And then, espying the glittering, fiery eyes of the cat, he mistook them for live coals and held the match to them to light it. But the cat, not understanding this joke, sprang at his face and spat and scratched at him. This frightened him dreadfully, and away he ran to the back door. But there the dog jumped up and bit him in the leg, and as he was crossing over the yard, the ass kicked him, and the cock, who had been awakened by the noise, crowed with all his might. At this the robber ran back as fast as he could to his comrades, and told the captain how a horrid witch had gotten into the house, and had spat at him and scratched his face with her long bony fingers, how a man with a knife in his hand had hidden himself behind the door and stabbed him in the leg, how a black monster stood in the yard and struck him with a club, and how the devil had sat upon the top of the house and cried out, "Throw the rascal up here!" After this, the robbers never dared to go back to the house, but the musicians were so pleased with their quarters that they took up their abode there, and there they are, I dare say, at this very day. End of The Traveling Musicians. Recording by Jedopi. www.publicdomainaudiobooks.blogspot.com.
Little Black Sambo by Helen Bannerman. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Little Black Sambo by Helen Bannerman. Once upon a time there was a little black boy, and his name was Little Black Sambo. And his mother was called Black Mumbo, and his father was called Black Jumbo. And Black Mumbo made him a beautiful little red coat, and a pair of beautiful little blue trousers. And Black Jumbo went to the bazaar and bought him a beautiful green umbrella and a lovely little pair of purple shoes with crimson soles and crimson linings. And then wasn't Little Black Sambo grand? So he put on all his fine clothes and went out for a walk in the jungle. And by he met a tiger, and the tiger said to him, "Little Black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And Little Black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up. I'll give you my beautiful little red coat." So the tiger said, "Very well, I won't eat you this time, but you must give me your beautiful little red coat." So the tiger got poor Little Black Sambo's beautiful little red coat and went away saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And Little Black Sambo went on, and by he met another tiger, and it said to him, "Little Black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And Little Black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up, and I'll give you my beautiful little blue trousers." So the tiger said, "Very well, I won't eat you this time, but you must give me your beautiful little blue trousers." So the tiger got poor Little Black Sambo's beautiful little blue trousers, and went away saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And little black Sambo went on, and by he met another tiger, and it said to him, "Little black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And little black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up, and I'll give you my beautiful little purple shoes with crimson soles and crimson linings." But the tiger said, "What use would your shoes be to me? I've got 4 feet and you've only got 2, so you haven't got enough shoes for me." But little black Sambo said, "You could wear them on your ears." "So I could," said the tiger. "That's a very good idea. Give them to me and I won't eat you this time." So the tiger got poor little black Sambo's beautiful little purple shoes with crimson soles and crimson linings, and went away saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And by little black Sambo met another tiger, and it said to him, "Little black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And little black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up, and I'll give you my beautiful green umbrella." But the tiger said, "How can I carry an umbrella when I need all my paws for walking with?" "You could tie a knot on your tail and carry it that way," said little black Sambo. "So I could," said the tiger. "Give it to me and I won't eat you this time." So he got poor little black Sambo's beautiful green umbrella, and went away saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And poor little black Sambo went away crying because the cruel tigers had taken all his fine clothes. Presently he heard a horrible noise that sounded like "grrrr," and it got louder and louder. "Oh dear," said little black Sambo, "there are all the tigers coming back to eat me up. What shall I do?" So he ran quickly to a palm tree, and peeped around it to see what the matter was. And there he saw all the tigers fighting and disputing which of them was the grandest. And at last they all got so angry that they jumped up and took off all the fine clothes and began to tear each other with their claws, and bite each other with their great big white teeth. And they came rolling and tumbling right to the foot of the very tree where little black Sambo was hiding. But he jumped quickly in behind the umbrella, and the tigers all caught hold of each other's tails, as they wrangled and scrambled, and so they found themselves in a ring round the tree. Then, when the tigers were very wee and very far away, little black Sambo jumped up and called out, "Oh, tigers, why have you taken off all your nice clothes? Don't you want them any more?" But the tigers only answered, "Grrrr." Then little black Sambo said, "If you want them, say so, or I'll take them away." But the tigers would not let go of each other's tails, and so they could only say, "Grrrr." And the tigers were very, very angry, but still they would not let go of each other's tails. And they were so angry that they ran around the tree, trying to eat each other up, and they ran faster and faster till they were whirling round so fast that you couldn't see their legs at all. And they still ran faster and faster and faster till they all just melted away, and then there was nothing left but a great big pool of melted butter, or ghee as it is called in India, round the foot of the tree. Now Black Jumbo was just coming home from his work with a great big brass pot in his arms, and when he saw what was left of all the tigers, he said, "Oh, what lovely melted butter! I'll take that home to Black Mumbo for her to cook with." So he put it all into the great big brass pot and took it home to Black Mumbo to cook with. When Black Mumbo saw the melted butter, wasn't she pleased? "Now," she said, "we'll all have pancakes for supper." So she got flour and eggs and milk and sugar and butter, and she made a huge big plate of most lovely pancakes, and she fried them in the melted butter which the tigers had made, and they were just as yellow and brown as little tigers. And then they all sat down to supper, and Black Mumbo ate 27 pancakes, and Black Jumbo ate 55, but little black Sambo ate 169 because he was so hungry. End of Little Black Sambo.
The Real Princess by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Abigail Bartels. The Real Princess by Hans Christian Andersen. There once was a prince who wished to marry a princess, but then she must be a real princess. He traveled all over the world in hopes of finding such a lady, but there was always something wrong. Princesses he found in plenty, but whether they were real princesses it was impossible for him to decide, for now one thing, now another, seemed to him not quite right about the ladies. At last he returned to his palace quite cast down, because he wished so much to have a real princess for his wife. One evening a fearful tempest arose. It thundered and lightning, and the rain poured down from the sky in torrents. Besides, it was as dark as pitch. All at once there was heard a violent knocking at the door, and the old king, the prince's father, went out himself to open it. It was a princess who was standing outside the door. What with the rain and the wind, she was in a sad condition. The water trickled down from her hair, and her clothes clung to her body. She said she was a real princess. "Ah, we shall soon see that," thought the old queen-mother. However, she said not a word of what she was going to do, but went quietly into the bedroom, took all the bedclothes off the bed, and put 3 little peas on the bedstead. She then laid 20 mattresses, one upon another, over the 3 peas, and put 20 feather beds over the mattresses. Upon this bed the princess was to pass the night. The next morning she was asked how she had slept. "Oh, very badly indeed," she replied. "I have scarcely closed my eyes the whole night through. I do not know what was in my bed, but I had something hard under me, and am all over black and blue. It has hurt me so much." Now it was plain that the lady must be a real princess, since she had been able to feel the 3 little peas through the 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. None but a real princess could have had such a delicate sense of feeling. The prince accordingly made her his wife, being now convinced that he had found a real princess. The 3 peas were, however, put into the cabinet of curiosities, where they are still to be seen, provided they are not lost. Wasn't this a lady of real delicacy? End of The Real Princess.
The Lost Dryad by Frank Richard Stockton. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The Lost Dryad by Frank Richard Stockton. There was once a Dryad who was truly lost. The summer was drawing to close, the nights were becoming cool, she had no home, and she did not know where she was. Not long before, while she was still in her oak tree, there had been a terrible storm. The tree had been dashed to the ground and splintered to pieces. While the poor Dryad had been blown away and away and away, she did not know where. Now she was looking for another oak tree to live in. But she was lost, absolutely lost. One tree she found which she thought might shelter her, but while she examined it she found that it was getting old and its trunk was badly cracked. After her terrible experience she was afraid to go into a cracked tree, and so she kept on her way. At a little distance she saw a village shaded by trees, and the thought came to her that she might possibly find a home in a big oak there. That would be fine, truly. She had never lived in a village. It would be a new experience. So she kept on, but when she reached the place she found that few of the trees were oaks, and these were not very well grown and too small for her. It was nearly supper time in the village, and therefore there were not many people in the street, but presently she met a big man with a cross face. "Oh ho, oh ho," he cried. "Who are you? You cannot go about the street like that." The poor Dryad was terribly frightened. "Like what?" she asked. "You must go home and dress," he said. "I am dressed," said she. "These are all the clothes I ever wear." "Do you call these clothes?" he said. "Come along with me. I am a constable. I will take you to the lock-up. You must be crazy, but they will take care of you there, and at any rate will dress you properly." The poor Dryad trembled from head to foot. She did not know what a lock-up was, but she knew it must be a terrible place, and she had never seen anyone look so cruel as this man. He had already seized her by the arm, and if his grasp should have been tighter, she believed her arm would break in two. Poor, weak, beautiful Dryad! What could she do? She thought of something. It was her only hope. It must be remembered that there is a peculiar property pertaining to the kiss of a Dryad. Whenever a Dryad kisses a human being, that person becomes 10 years younger. So all good mothers are very careful to keep their children away from large oak trees. If a girl of a dozen years were to sit in the shade of one of those trees, she might attract the attention of an affectionate tree dweller. And then, if this Dryad should kiss her, the little toddler of 2 years might go home, if perchance she remembered where she lived, and astound her parents. But if a child who was not yet 10 should be kissed, it would disappear utterly. The Dryad remembered her rare gift as she looked up tearfully into the stern face of the constable. "Please, sir," said she. "Don't take me away. I shall be frightened to death if you do. I have something to tell you, but only you must hear it. Please let me whisper it to you." The constable looked at her. He was fond of hearing secrets, and it was quite proper that people should confide in him. So he bent down his head to hear what the dryad had to say. In a moment she kissed him twice, and before he had time to notice the change, he was a man of 30 years of age, vigorous and handsome. He released his grasp upon her arm and stood up straight and tall. "Oh ho!" he cried, "and who are you?" "Put down your head," said the dryad, "and let me tell you." And she gave him 2 more kisses. Now there stood before her a boy of 10, very much troubled. "I don't know what is the matter with my clothes," said he. "My breeches are all down about my feet. They are like an old man's trousers, and my shoes and stockings. Where did I get such big shoes and stockings? And this great jerkin is too big for me. I'm going to throw it off." "That is right, little boy," said the dryad. "Throw it off, and pull off those shoes and stockings. You can walk a great deal better in your bare feet. You must have been asleep and in a dream. You put on your father's clothes." "I expect that was it," said he. "It must have been that." "Now run along home, little boy," said the dryad, "and carry carefully your father's jerkin and his shoes and stockings. Perhaps if you put them where you found them, he may never know. Now run along." And the little boy ran along. The dryad was now alone, but she was still frightened. She was sure there were no trees here which would suit her, and she was afraid of meeting some other cruel person. So she slipped into a side street, and there she saw a light coming through a glass door. This was the only light in the street, and she went up to it and looked in. Inside was a small room, not very well furnished, but by a table with a light on it there sat a girl trimming a hat. The dryad smiled with pleasure. She was not afraid of a girl, especially one who was so pretty and looked so gentle. Perhaps she might tell her where there was a good oak tree. So she opened the door without making any noise and stepped in. At first the girl was startled, and dropped the hat she was trimming, but when the dryad quickly told her who she was and what a sad plight she was in, she was reassured. She had heard of dryads, and was glad to see one. "But you must remember this," she exclaimed. "On no account must you kiss me. I am engaged to be married, and I would not have you kiss me for the world." "Oh, no, no, no," said the dryad. "No matter how good you are to me, I shall be very careful. Can you tell me where there is a large oak tree?" "I do not remember any," said the girl, "but I expect you sorely need one, for you must feel cold in the evening." "Oh, no," said the dryad, "I am not cold. But what a beautiful hat you are making! Such a lovely silken lace you are putting on it." "Yes," said the girl, holding up the hat before the lamp, "I'm trying to make it pretty, but this silk is tarnished. It has lost a good deal of its color. My stepmother thinks it is good enough for me, and so I must do the best I can with it." "Poor girl," said the dryad, "she ought to give you the nicest stuffs there are in the village, you're so pretty." And moved by pity and affection, she was about to give the girl a kiss of sympathy, but remembering just in time that that would never do, she kissed the hat. Instantly the silk and the lace were as bright and new as if they had just come out of the shop. The dryad exclaimed with delight. "Look, look!" she cried. "Did you ever see more charming colors?" The girl had never seen more charming colors, but her countenance fell. "They are very pretty," she said, "but what an old-fashioned hat! It looks like one of those hats people used to wear 10 years ago." Now the poor dryad was greatly troubled. "Have I spoiled it?" she said. "Oh, I shall be too sorry if I have done that." The girl turned the hat around and looked at it on every side. "Of course I could not wear it as it is," she said, "but I am sure I can alter it. Yes, I can change the shape, and then with these new trimmings it will be perfectly lovely. I thank you ever so much, but please do not come any nearer. You might forget yourself." "And you are going to be married?" asked the dryad. "Yes, truly, if I can," said the girl, "but my stepmother does not wish it. She wants me to stay here and work for her. But I shall be patient, and in the meantime I am so glad that he will see me in my new hat." "And is your stepmother so very cross?" asked the dryad. "Oh, very. If she were at home I could not let you stay here, and as I expect her to come back shortly, I am afraid." The poor dryad clasped her hands. "You do not mean," said she, "that I must go away? I hoped that I might stay here until the people of the village were all in bed." "I am very sorry," said the girl, "but really, if my stepmother should come back and see you here, I don't know what would happen. But I will tell you what I will do. I will lend you one of my frocks and a cape, and you can put on my sunbonnet. Then you can go out and look for a tree, and people will not be apt to notice you. And if you will come back after a while, when my stepmother has gone to bed, I will go out with you and help you find a tree, if you have not found one. Oh, now please don't. People can be very grateful without kissing, you know, and I will bring you the clothes in a minute." When the dryad had put on the frock and the little cape and the sunbonnet she looked very much like an ordinary person. and when she went out on the street nobody noticed her, for there were girls in that village who were so poor that they were obliged to go barefooted. This lost Dryad had no very good idea of time, and after she had walked about the streets, and even a little way into the country, looking for a tree and finding none, she thought that the cruel stepmother must surely have gone to bed, and so she went back to the house of her friend the girl, and opening the door she slipped in. There she saw the cruel stepmother scolding the girl. As she entered, the stepmother stopped short in her scolding, and the poor girl looked as if she was about to faint. "Hi ho!" cried the woman. "Then who is this? How dare you come in without knocking? What! Where did you get that sunbonnet, you wretched creature?" she cried, addressing her stepdaughter. "What does this mean? And your cape and your frock?" And without waiting for an answer, she stepped up to the Dryad. "Take that off this minute, whoever you are!" she cried, and as she said this she grasped the sunbonnet and pulled it from the Dryad's head. The girl almost fainted and sank into a chair, while the poor Dryad, nearly scared out of her wits, had barely sense enough left to throw her arms around the stepmother's neck and give her 4 kisses as quick as lightning. The next day was the stepmother's birthday, and she intended to celebrate the occasion by inviting some of her old cronies to sup with her, but now there was a little girl standing on the floor beginning to cry. The Dryad clapped her hands with delight. "So many clothes," she exclaimed, "and such a dear little body in the middle of them all." The girl with the hat cried out, "Oh, what have you done?" But in spite of her consternation she could not help laughing. "She does look funny," said she. There was such a difference between the little child and the cross stepmother, and it was impossible for any one to be really sorry. "How queer it is," said the Dryad. "She knows nothing at all of the life she has lived." "Of course not," said the girl. "She could not look back on her future, you know." "I want to go to bed," said the little one, rubbing her eyes, "and please take these things off." "That is what we must do," cried the Dryad. "We must undress her and put her to bed." "No, let me do it alone. You might forget," said the girl. So the little child was put to bed in the back room, and in a moment was asleep. "Now I need not go away," cried the Dryad. "No, indeed," said the girl. "I should be afraid to be left alone with that little thing who was my stepmother." The Dryad threw aside the uncomfortable gown and cape, and her face sparkled with delight. She was so glad that she need not go away, and was so happy at what she had done. "Now," said she to the girl, "you can be married, and you two can take care of the little girl." "Yes, I can be married," said the other, "but not immediately, and in the meantime I must support this little child and myself. I have no money, and how am I going to do that?" "Oh, I wish I could help you," cried the Dryad. "Could not I live here until you are married? I really ought to do something for you, and I will never kiss you or the child." "But how could you help me?" said the girl, smiling. "I don't know," said the Dryad, reflecting. "Perhaps there are some people in the village who would like to be younger." "Yes," said the girl, "that might do. We could live here together and set up a kissery. It will be very pleasant for me to have everything my own way and not to be scolded, and I shall take the best possible care of the child. I know there are people who would like to be kissed, but you will have to be very, very careful not to make mistakes." "Oh, I will do that," cried the Dryad. "I promise you that from this moment I will never kiss anybody, old or young, unless you tell me to." At this moment there was a sound of hurrying feet outside. The door was thrown open, and an excited group of men and women rushed into the room. "A dreadful thing has happened," cried one of the women. "The constable, Johann Milder, has disappeared. He left his clothes behind him. Stranger yet, there is a little boy at his house who says he lives there, and who he is and where he came from nobody knows. We've come to see your stepmother. She is a wise woman, and perhaps she may help us." "Where is she? Call her quickly." "She is here," said the girl, and stepping to the bed she turned down the covering. Then all the people pushed into the back room, and when they saw the sleeping child, 2 women fainted just where they stood. The others were so much astounded that not one of them could speak a word. Then the Dryad, who so far had not been noticed, laughed out merrily. It was all so funny that she could not help it. At this the people turned and stared at her. There were some among them who had seen Dryads, and they set up a great shout. "A Dryad!" they cried, "a wicked spirit, a tree witch! She has done this! She has been about with her sinful kisses!" With one accord the villagers dashed at the Dryad as if they would pound her to pieces and trample them upon the floor. But the Dryad was in the doorway between the 2 rooms, and she moved so quickly that they could not touch her. Had she felt free to do as she pleased, she might have rushed in among them, and in a very few minutes have made a kindergarten of the whole company. But she had promised her dear friend, the girl, that without her permission she would never kiss anybody, and she could not break her word. So she fled through the open door, and away, and away, and away, until she was far from the village. It was not long before the Dryad came to the great oak, which was old, and whose trunk was cracked. "Ah," she cried, "here is this tree which I would not enter, but I shall not despise it again. It will shelter me for a time, and I must no longer remain out in this cruel world." So she slipped into the oak, and was so glad to feel herself safe, that she kissed the inside of the tree over and over again, telling it how thankful she was to have its protection, and to feel again as if she was at home. It was not long before the aged oak was 100 years younger, strong, vigorous, clad in the brightest green, and able to withstand the fiercest storm. Now, when the villagers knew what had happened, they thought it quite right that the girl should marry and take care of the child who had been her stepmother. And when the boy who had been the constable grew up, he married this child, and there was a great deal more happiness in the village than there would have been if the Lost Dryad had not come to it looking for a tree. End of The Lost Dryad by Frank Richard Stockton.
Cautionary Tales for Children by Hilaire Belloc. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recorded by Algy, Perth, Western Australia. Cautionary Tales for Children by Hilaire Belloc. Introduction. On being asked by a reader whether the verses contained in this book were true. And is it true? It is not true. And if it were, it wouldn't do for people such as me and you, who pretty nearly all day long are doing something rather wrong. Because if things were really so, you would have perished long ago, and I would not have lived to write the noble lines that meet your sight, nor BTB survive to draw the nicest things you ever saw. Hilaire Belloc. Jim, who ran away from his nurse and was eaten by a lion. There was a boy whose name was Jim. His friends were very good to him. They gave him tea and cakes and jam, and slices of delicious ham, and chocolate with pink inside, and little tricycles to ride, and read him stories through and through, and even took him to the zoo. But there it was the dreadful fate befell him, which I now relate. You know, or at least you ought to know, for I have often told you so, that children never are allowed to leave their nurses in a crowd. Now this was Jim's especial foible. He ran away when he was able, and on this inauspicious day he slipped his hand and ran away. He hadn't gone a yard when, bang! With open jaws a lion sprang, and hungrily began to eat the boy, beginning at his feet. Now, just imagine how it feels when first your toes, and then your heels, and then, by gradual degrees, your shins and ankles, calves and knees, are slowly eaten bit by bit. No wonder Jim detested it. No wonder he shouted, "Hi!" The honest keeper heard his cry. Though very fat, he almost ran to help the little gentleman. "Ponto!" he ordered as he came, for Ponto was the lion's name. "Ponto!" he cried, with angry frown. "Let go, sir! Down, sir! Put ye down!" The lion made a sudden stop. He let the dainty morsel drop, and slunk reluctant to his cage, snarling with disappointed rage. But when he bent him over Jim, the honest keeper's eyes were dim. The lion having reached his head, the miserable boy was dead. When nurse informed his parents, they were more concerned than I can say. His mother, as she dried her eyes, said, "Well, it gives me no surprise. He would not do as he was told." His father, who was self-controlled, bade all the children round attend to James's miserable end, and always keep a hold of nurse, for fear of finding something worse. Henry King, who chewed bits of string, and was early cut off in dreadful agonies. The chief defect of Henry King was chewing little bits of string. At last he swallowed some which tied itself in ugly knots inside. Physicians of the utmost fame were called at once, but when they came they answered, as they took their fees, "There is no cure for this disease. Henry will very soon be dead." His parents stood about his bed lamenting his untimely death, when Henry, with his latest breath, cried, "Oh, my friends, be warned by me, that breakfast, dinner, lunch, and tea are all the human frame requires." With that, the wretched child expires. Matilda, who told lies, and was burnt to death. Matilda told such dreadful lies, it made one gasp and stretch one's eyes. Her aunt, who from her earliest youth had kept a strict regard for truth, attempted to believe Matilda. The effort very nearly killed her, and would have done so, had not she discovered this infirmity. For once, towards the close of day, Matilda, growing tired of play, and finding she was left alone, went tiptoe to the telephone, and summoned the immediate aid of London's noble fire brigade. Within an hour the gallant band were pouring in on every hand, from Putney, Hackney Downs, and Bow, with courage high and hearts aglow. They galloped, roaring through the town, "Matilda's house is burning down!" Inspired by British cheers and loud proceeding from the frenzied crowd, they ran their ladders through a score of windows on the ballroom floor, and took peculiar pains to souse the pictures up and down the house, until Matilda's aunt succeeded in showing them they were not needed, and even then she had to pay to get the men to go away. It happened that a few weeks later her aunt was off to the theatre to see that interesting play, The Second Mrs. Tanqueray. She had refused to take her niece to hear this entertaining piece, a deprivation just and wise, to punish her for telling lies. That night a fire did break out. You should have heard Matilda shout. You should have heard her scream and bawl, and throw the windows up and call to people passing in the street, the rapidly increasing heat encouraging her to obtain their confidence, but all in vain, for every time she shouted fire, they only answered, "Little liar," and therefore when her aunt returned, Matilda and the house were burned. Franklin Hyde, who caroused in the dirt and was corrected by his uncle. His uncle came on Franklin Hyde carousing in the dirt. He shook him hard from side to side and hit him till it hurt, exclaiming with a final thud, "Take that, abandoned boy, for playing in the disgusting mud as though it were a toy." Moral. From Franklin Hyde's adventure learn to pass your leisure time in cleanly merriment, and turn from mud and ooze and slime and every form of nastiness, but on the other hand, children in ordinary dress may always play with sand. Godolphin Horne, who was cursed with the sin of pride, and became a boot-black. Godolphin Horne was nobly born. He held the human race in scorn, and lived with all his sisters where his father lived, in Berkeley Square. And oh, the lad was deathly proud. He never shook your hand or bowed, but merely smirked and nodded thus. How perfectly ridiculous! Alas, that such affected tricks should flourish in a child of 6, for such was young Godolphin's age. Just then the court required a page, whereat the Lord High Chamberlain, the kindest and the best of men, he went good-naturedly and took a perfectly enormous book, called people qualified to be attendant on his Majesty, and murmured, as he scanned the list, to see that no one should be missed, "There's William Coutts has got the flu, and Billy Higgs would never do, and Guy de Vere is far too young, and wasn't Dalton's father hung? And as for Alexander Byng, I think I know the kind of thing a churchman, cleanly, nobly born. Come, let us say Godolphin Horne." But hardly had he said the word, when murmurs of dissent were heard. The King of Iceland's eldest son said, "Thank you, I am taking none." The aged Duchess of Athlone remarked, in her subacid tone, "I doubt if he is what we need." With which the bishops all agreed, and even Lady Mary Flood, so kind, and oh, so really good, said, "No, he wouldn't do at all. He'd make us feel a lot too small." The Chamberlain said, "Well, well, well, no doubt you're right. One cannot tell." He took his gold and diamond pen, and scratched Godolphin out again. So now Godolphin is the boy who blacks the boots at the Savoy. Algernon, who played with a loaded gun, and on missing his sister was reprimanded by his father. Young Algernon, the doctor's son, was playing with a loaded gun. He pointed it toward his sister, aimed very carefully, but missed her. Her father, who was standing near, the loud explosion chanced to hear, and reprimanded Algernon for playing with a loaded gun. Hildebrand, who was frightened by a passing motor, and was brought to reason. "Oh, murder! What was that, papa?" "My child, it was a motor car, a most ingenious toy, designed to captivate and charm much, rather than rouse alarm in any English boy. What would your great-grandfather, who was aide de camp to General Bru, and lost a leg at Waterloo, and quatre bras, une ligne too, and died at Trafalgar? What would he have remarked to hear his young descendant shriek with fear, because he happened to be near a harmless motor car? But do not fret about it. Come, we'll off to town and purchase some." Lord Lundy, who was too freely moved to tears, and thereby ruined his political career. Lord Lundy from his earliest years was far too freely moved to tears. For instance, if his mother said, "Lundy, it's time to go to bed," he bellowed like a little Turk. Or if his father, Lord Dunkirk, said, "Hi!" in a commanding tone, "Hi, Lundy, leave the cat alone," Lord Lundy, letting go its tail, would raise so terrible a wail, as moved his grandpapa the Duke to utter the severe rebuke, "When I, sir, was a little boy, an animal was not a toy." His father's eldest sister, who was married to a parvenu, confided to her husband, "Drat! The miserable peevish brat! Why don't they drown the little beast?" Suggestions which, to say the least, are not what we expect to hear from daughters of an English peer. His grandmamma, his mother's mother, who had some dignity or other, the Garter, or no matter what, I can't remember all the lot, said, "Oh, that I were brisk and spry to give him that for which to cry." An empty wish, alas, for she was blind, and nearly 93. The dear old butler thought, but there, I really neither know nor care for what the dear old butler thought. In my opinion, butlers ought to know their place, and not to play the old retainer night and day. I'm getting tired, and so are you. Let's cut the poem into two. Lord Lundy, second canto. It happened to Lord Lundy then, as happens to so many men. Towards the age of 26, they shoved him into politics, in which profession he commanded the income that his rank demanded, in turn as Secretary for India, the Colonies, and War. But very soon his friends began to doubt if he were quite the man. Thus, if a member rose to say, as members do from day to day, arising out of that reply, Lord Lundy would begin to cry. A hint at harmless little jobs would shake him with convulsive sobs, while as for revelations, these would simply bring him to his knees, and leave him whimpering like a child. It drove his colleagues raving wild. They let him sink from post to post, from 1500 at the most to 8, and barely 6, and then to be curator of Big Ben. And finally there came a threat to oust him from the cabinet. The Duke, his aged grandsire, bore the shame till he could bear no more. He rallied his declining powers, summoned the youth to Brackley Towers, and bitterly addressed him thus: "Sir, you have disappointed us. We had intended you to be the next Prime Minister but 3. The stocks were sold, the press was squared, the middle class was quite prepared. But as it is, my language fails. Go out and govern New South Wales." The aged patriot groaned and died, and gracious, how Lord Lundy cried. Rebecca, who slammed doors for fun and perished miserably. A trick that everyone abhors in little girls is slamming doors. A wealthy banker's little daughter, who lived in Palace Green, Bayswater, by name Rebecca Offendort, was given to this furious sport. She would deliberately go and slam the door like Billy-O, to make her Uncle Jacob start. She was not really bad at heart, but only rather rude and wild. She was an aggravating child. It happened that a marble bust of Abraham was standing just above the door this little lamb had carefully prepared to slam, and down it came. It knocked her flat. It laid her out. She looked like that. Her funeral sermon, which was long and followed by a sacred song, mentioned her virtues, it is true, but dwelt upon her vices too, and showed the dreadful end of one who goes and slams the door for fun. The children who were brought to hear the awful tale from far and near were much impressed, and inly swore they never more would slam the door, as often they had done before. George, who played with a dangerous toy, and suffered a catastrophe of considerable dimensions. When George's grandmamma was told that George had been as good as gold, she promised in the afternoon to buy him an immense balloon, and so she did. But when it came, it got into the candle flame, and being of a dangerous sort, exploded with a loud report. The lights went out, the windows broke, the room was filled with reeking smoke, and in the darkness shrieks and yells were mingled with electric bells, and falling masonry and groans, and crunching as of broken bones, and dreadful shrieks, when, worst of all, the house itself began to fall. It tottered, shuddering to and fro, then crashed into the street below, which happened to be Savile Row. When help arrived among the dead were cousin Mary, little Fred, the footman, both of them, the groom, the man that cleaned the billiard-room, the chaplain, and the still-room maid, and I am dreadfully afraid that Monsieur Champignon, the chef, will now be permanently deaf, and both his aids are much the same, while George, who was in part to blame, received, you will regret to hear, a nasty lump behind the ear. Moral. The moral is that little boys should not be given dangerous toys. Charles Augustus Fortescue, who always did what was right, and so accumulated an immense fortune. The nicest child I ever knew was Charles Augustus Fortescue. He never lost his cap, or tore his stockings, or his pinafore. In eating bread he made no crumbs. He was extremely fond of sums, to which, however, he preferred the parsing of a Latin word. He sought, when it was within his power, for information twice an hour. And as for finding mutton fat unappetizing, far from that. He often at his father's board would beg them of his own accord to give him, if they did not mind, the greasiest morsels they could find. His later years did not belie the promise of his infancy. In public life he always tried to take a judgment broad and wide. In private none was more than he renowned for quiet courtesy. He rose at once in his career, and long before his 40th year had wedded Fifi, only child of Bunyan, first Lord Aberfield. He thus became immensely rich, and built the splendid mansion which is called the Cedars, Muswell Hill, where he resides in affluence still, to show what everyone might become by simply doing right. End of Cautionary Tales for Children by Hilaire Belloc. Recorded by Algy Pug, Perth, Western Australia.
Allerleirauh or the Many-Furred Creature by Andrew Lang. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Allerleirauh or the Many-Furred Creature by Andrew Lang. There was once upon a time a king who had a wife with golden hair, and she was so beautiful that you couldn't find anyone like her in the world. It happened that she fell ill, and when she felt that she must soon die, she sent for the king and said, "If you want to marry after my death, make no one queen unless she is just as beautiful as I am, and has just such golden hair as I have. Promise me this." After the king had promised her this, she closed her eyes and died. For a long time the king was not to be comforted, and he did not even think of taking a second wife. At last his counsellors said, "The king must marry again, so that we may have a queen." So messengers were sent far and wide to seek for a bride equal to the late queen in beauty. But there was no one in the wide world, and if there had been, she could not have had such golden hair. Then the messengers came home again, not having been able to find the queen. Now the king had a daughter, who was just as beautiful as her dead mother, and had just such golden hair. One day, when she had grown up, her father looked at her, and saw that she was exactly like her mother. So he said to his counselors, "I will marry my daughter to one of you, and she shall be queen, for she is exactly like her dead mother, and when I die her husband shall be king." But when the princess heard of her father's decision, she was not at all pleased, and said to him, "Before I do your bidding, I must have 3 dresses, one as golden as the sun, one as silver as the moon, and one as shining as the stars. Besides these, I want a cloak made of 1,000 different kinds of skin. Every animal in your kingdom must give a bit of his skin to it." But she thought to herself, "This will be quite impossible, and I shall not have to marry someone I do not care for." The king, however, was not to be turned from his purpose, and he commanded the most skilled maidens in his kingdom to weave the 3 dresses, one as golden as the sun, one as silver as the moon, and one as shining as the stars. And he gave orders to all his huntsmen to catch one of every kind of beast in the kingdom, and get a bit of its skin to make the cloak of 1,000 pieces of fur. At last, when all was ready, the king commanded the cloak to be brought to him, and he spread it out before the princess and said, "Tomorrow shall be your wedding day." When the princess saw that there was no more hope of changing her father's resolution, she determined to flee away. In the night, when everyone else was sleeping, she got up and took 3 things from her treasures: a gold ring, a little golden spinning wheel, and a gold reel. She put the sun, moon, and star dresses in a nutshell, drew on the cloak of many skins, and made her face and hands black with soot. Then she commended herself to God, and went out and travelled the whole night till she came to a large forest, and as she was very much tired, she sat down inside a hollow tree and fell asleep. The sun rose, and still she slept on, although it was nearly noon. Now it happened that the king to whom this wood belonged was hunting in it. When his dogs came to the tree they sniffed, and ran round and round it barking. The king said to the huntsman, "See what sort of wild beast is in there." The huntsman went in and came back and said, "In the hollow tree there lives a wonderful animal that we don't know, and we have never seen one like it. Its skin is made of 1,000 pieces of fur, but it is lying down asleep." The king said, "See if you can catch it alive, then fasten it to the cart and we will take it with us." When the huntsman seized the maiden, she awoke and was frightened, and cried out to them, "I am a poor child, forsaken by father and mother. Take pity on me and let me go with you." Then they said to her, "Many-furred creature, you can work in the kitchen. Come with us and sweep the ashes together." So they put her in the cart and they went back to the palace. There they showed her a tiny room under the stairs, where no daylight came, and said to her, "Many-furred creature, you can live and sleep here." Then she was sent to the kitchen, where she carried wood and water, poked the fire, washed vegetables, plucked fowls, swept up ashes, and did all the dirty work. So the many-furred creature lived for a long time in great poverty. Ah, beautiful king's daughter, what is going to befall you now? It happened once, when a great feast was being held in the palace, that she said to the cook, "Can I go upstairs for a little bit and look on? I will stand outside the doors." The cook replied, "Yes, you can go up, but in half an hour you must be back here to sweep up the ashes." Then she took a little oil lamp and went into her little room, threw off her fur cloak and washed off the soot from her face and hands, so that her beauty shone forth, and it was as if one sunbeam after another were coming out of a black cloud. Then she opened the nut and took out the dress as golden as the sun. And when she had done this, she went up to the feast, and everyone stepped out of her way, for nobody knew her, and they thought she must be a king's daughter. But the king came towards her, and gave her his hand and danced with her, thinking to himself, "My eyes have never beheld any one so fair." When the dance was ended, she curtsied to him, and when the king looked round she had disappeared, no one knew whither. The guards who were standing before the palace were called and questioned, but no one had seen her. She had run to her little room and had quickly taken off her dress, made her face and hands black, put on the fur cloak, and was once more the many-furred creature. When she came into the kitchen and was setting about her work for sweeping the ashes together, the cook said to her, "Let that wait till tomorrow, and just cook the king's soup for me. I want to have a little peep at the company upstairs, but be sure that you don't let a hair fall into it, otherwise you will get nothing to eat in future." So the cook went away, and the many-furred creature cooked the soup for the king. She made a bright soup as well as she possibly could, and when it was done, she fetched a gold ring from her little room, and laid it in the tureen in which the soup was served up. When the dance was ended, the king had his soup brought to him and ate it, and it was so good that he thought he had never tasted such soup in his life. But when he came to the bottom of the dish, he saw a golden ring lying there, and he could not imagine how it got in. Then he commanded the cook to be brought before him. The cook was terrified when he heard the command, and said to the many-furred creature, "You must have let the hair fall into the soup, and if you have, you deserve a good beating." When he came before the king asked who had cooked the soup. The cook answered, "I cooked it." But the king said, "That's not true, for it was quite different and much better soup than you have ever cooked." Then the cook said, "I must confess, I did not cook the soup, the many-furred creature did." "Let her be brought before me," said the king. When the many-furred creature came, the king asked her who she was. "I am a poor child without father or mother." Then he asked her, "What do you do in my palace?" "I am of no use, except to have boots thrown at my head." "How did you get the ring which was in the soup?" he asked. "I know nothing at all about the ring," she answered. So the king could find out nothing, and was obliged to send her away. After a time there was another feast, and the many-furred creature begged the cook, as at last one, to let her go and look on. He answered, "Yes, but come back again in half an hour, and cook the king the bread soup that he likes so much." So she ran away to her little room, washed herself quickly, took out of her net the dress as silver as the moon, and put it on. Then she went upstairs, looking just like a king's daughter, and the king came towards her, delighted to see her again, and as the dance had just begun, they danced together. But when the dance was ended, she disappeared again so quickly that the king could not see which way she went. She ran to her little room and changed herself once more into the many-furred creature, and went into the kitchen to cook the bread soup. When the cook was upstairs, she fetched the golden spinning wheel and put it in the dish, so that the soup was poured over it. It was brought to the king, who ate it, and liked it as much as the last time. He had the cook sent to him, and again he had to confess that the many-furred creature had cooked the soup. Then the many-furred creature came before the king, but she said again that she was of no use except to have boots thrown at her head, and that she knew nothing at all of the golden spinning wheel. When the king had a feast for the third time, things did not turn out quite the same as the other two. The cook said, "You must be a witch, many-furred creature, for you always put something in the soup, so that it is much better and tastes nicer to the king than any that I cook." But because she begged hard, he let her go up for the usual time. Now she put on the dress as shining as the stars, and stepped into the hall with it. The king danced again with the beautiful maiden, and thought she had never looked so beautiful. And while he was dancing, he put a golden ring on her finger without her seeing it, and he commanded that the dance should last longer than usual. When it was finished, he wanted to keep her in his hands, but she broke from him and sprang so quickly away among the people that she vanished from his sight. She ran as fast as she could to her little room under the stairs, but because she had stayed too long, beyond the half hour, she could not stop to take off the beautiful dress, but only threw the fur cloak over it, and in her haste she did not make herself quite black with soot, one finger remaining white. The many-furred creature now ran into the kitchen, cooked the king's bread soup, and when the cook had gone, she laid the golden reel in the dish. When the king found the reel at the bottom, he had the many-furred creature brought to him, and then he saw the white finger and the ring which he had put on her hand in the dance. Then he took her hand and held her tightly, and as she was trying to get away, she undid the fur cloak a little bit, and the star dress shone out. The king seized the cloak and tore it off her. Her golden hair came down, and she stood there in her full splendor, and could not hide herself any more. And when the soot and ashes had been washed from her face, she looked more beautiful than anyone in the world. But the king said, "You are my dear bride, and we will never be separated from one another." So the wedding was celebrated, and they lived happily ever after. Grimm. End of Allerleirauh, or The Many-Furred Creature. Recording by Elli in April 2010.
This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Recording by Sandra Estenson. The Nightingale by Hans Christian Andersen. In China, as you know, the emperor is a Chinaman, and all the people around him are Chinamen too. It is many years since the story I am going to tell you happened, but that is all the more reason for telling it, lest it should be forgotten. The Emperor's palace was the most beautiful thing in the world. It was made entirely of the finest porcelain, very costly, but at the same time so fragile that it could only be touched with the very greatest care. There were the most extraordinary flowers to be seen in the garden. The most beautiful ones had little silver bells tied to them, which tinkled perpetually, so that one should not pass the flowers without looking at them. Every little detail in the garden had been most carefully thought out, and it was so big that even the gardener himself did not know where it ended. If one went on walking, one came to beautiful woods with lofty trees and deep lakes. The wood extended to the sea, which was deep and blue, deep enough for large ships to sail right up under the branches of the trees. Among these trees lived a nightingale, which sang so deliciously that even the poor fisherman, who had plenty of other things to do, lay still to listen to it when he was out at night drawing in his nets. "Heavens, how beautiful it is," he said, but then he had to attend to his business and forgot it. The next night, when he heard it again, he would again exclaim, "Heavens, how beautiful it is." Travelers came to the Emperor's capital from every country in the world. They admired everything very much, especially the palace and the gardens. But when they heard the nightingale, they all said, "This is better than anything." When they got home, they described it, and learned ones wrote many books about the town, the palace, and the garden. But nobody forgot the nightingale. It was always put above everything else. Those among them who were poets wrote the most beautiful poems all about the nightingale in the woods by the deep blue sea. These books went all over the world, and in course of time some of them reached the Emperor. He sat in his golden chair, reading and nodding his head, well pleased to hear such beautiful descriptions of the town, the palace, and the garden. "But the nightingale is best of all," he read. "What is this?" said the Emperor. "The nightingale? Why, I know nothing about it. Is there such a bird in my kingdom, and in my own garden into the bargain, and I have never heard of it? Imagine my having to discover this from a book." Then he called his gentleman-in-waiting, who was so grand that when any one of a lower rank dared to speak to him or ask him a question, he would only answer, "Pfft," which meant nothing at all. "There is said to be a very wonderful bird called a nightingale here," said the Emperor. "They say it is better than anything else in all my great kingdom. Why have I never been told anything about it?" "I've never heard it mentioned," said the gentleman-in-waiting. "It has never been presented at court." "I wish it to appear here this evening to sing to me," said the Emperor. "The whole world knows what I am possessed of, and I know nothing about it." "I have never heard it mentioned before," said the gentleman-in-waiting. "I will seek it, and I will find it." But where was it to be found? The gentleman-in-waiting ran upstairs and downstairs and in and out of all the rooms and corridors. No one of all those he met had ever heard anything about the nightingale. So the gentleman-in-waiting ran back to the Emperor and said that it must be a myth invented by the writers of the books. "Your Imperial Majesty must not believe everything that is written. Books are often mere inventions, even if they do not belong to what we call the black art. But the book in which I read it is sent to me by the powerful Emperor of Japan, so it can't be untrue. I will hear this nightingale. I insist upon it being here tonight. I extend my most gracious protection to it, and if it is not forthcoming, I will have the whole court trampled upon after supper." "Tsing Pei," said the gentleman in waiting, and away he ran again. Up and down all the stairs, in and out of all the rooms and corridors. Half the court ran with him, for they none of them wished to be trampled on. There was much questioning about this nightingale, which was known to all the outside world, but to no one at court. At last they found a poor little maid in the kitchen. She said, "Oh heavens, the nightingale? I know it very well. Yes, indeed, it can sing. Every evening I'm allowed to take broken meat to my poor sick mother. She lives down by the shore. On my way back, when I am tired, I rest a while in the wood, and then I hear the nightingale. Its song brings the tears into my eyes. I feel as if my mother were kissing me." "Little kitchen maid," said the gentleman in waiting, "I will procure you a permanent position in the kitchen and permission to see the emperor dining, if you will take us to the nightingale. It is commanded to appear at court tonight." They all went out into the wood, where the nightingale usually sang. Half the court was there. As they were going along at their best pace, a cow began to bellow. "Oh," said a young courtier, "there we have it. What wonderful power for such a little creature! I have certainly heard it before." "No, those are the cows bellowing. We are a long way yet from the place." Then the frogs began to croak in the marsh. "Beautiful," said the Chinese chaplain. "It is just like the tinkling of church bells." "No, those are frogs," said the little kitchen maid, "but I think we shall soon hear it now." Then the nightingale began to sing. "There it is," said the little girl. "Listen, listen. There it sits," and she pointed to a little gray bird up among the branches. "Is it possible?" said the gentleman in waiting. "I should never have thought it was like that. How common it looks! Seeing so many grand people must have frightened all its colors away." "Little nightingale," called the kitchen maid quite loud, "our gracious emperor wishes you to sing to him." "With the greatest of pleasure," said the nightingale, warbling away in the most beautiful fashion. "It is just like crystal bells," said the gentleman in waiting. "Look at its little throat, how active it is. It is extraordinary that we have never heard it before. I am sure it will be a great success at court." "Shall I sing again to the emperor?" said the nightingale, who thought he was present. "My precious little nightingale," said the gentleman in waiting, "I have the honor to command your attendance at a court festival tonight, where you will charm His Gracious Majesty the Emperor with your fascinating singing." "It sounds best among the trees," said the nightingale, but it went with them willingly when it heard that the emperor wished it. The palace had been brightened up for the occasion. The walls and the floors, which were all made of china, shone by the light of many thousand golden lamps. The most beautiful flowers, all of the tinkling kind, were arranged in the corridors. There was hurrying to and fro, and a great draught. But this was just what made the bells ring. One's ears were full of the tinkling. In the middle of the large reception room where the emperor sat, a golden rod had been fixed, on which the nightingale was to perch. The whole court was assembled, and the little kitchen maid had been permitted to stand behind the door, as she now had the actual title of cook. They were all dressed in their best. Everybody's eyes were turned towards the little gray bird, at which the emperor was nodding. The nightingale sang delightfully, and tears came into the emperor's eyes. Nay, they rolled down his cheeks. And then the nightingale sang more beautifully than ever. Its notes touched all hearts. The emperor was charmed, and said the nightingale should have his gold slipper to wear round its neck. But the nightingale declined with thanks. It had already been sufficiently rewarded. I have seen the tears in the eyes of the emperor. That is my richest reward. The tears of an emperor have a wonderful power. God knows I am sufficiently recompensed. And then it again burst into its sweet heavenly song. That is the most beautiful coquetting I have ever seen, said the ladies, and they took some water into their mouths to try and make the same gurgling when anyone spoke to them, thinking so to equal the nightingale. Even the lackeys and the chambermaids announced that they were satisfied, and that's saying a great deal. They are always the most difficult people to please. Yes, indeed, the nightingale had made a sensation. It was to stay at court now, and to have its own cage, as well as liberty to walk out twice a day and once in the night. It always had 12 footmen, with each one holding a ribbon which was tied round its leg. There was not much pleasure in an outing of that sort. The whole town talked about the marvelous bird, and if two people met, one said to the other night, and the other answered gale, and then they sighed, perfectly understanding each other. 11 cheesemongers' children were called after it, but they had not got a voice among them. One day a large parcel came for the emperor. Outside was written the word Nightingale. Here we have another book about this celebrated bird, said the emperor. But it was no book. It was a little work of art in a box, an artificial nightingale, exactly like the living one, but it was studded all over with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. When the bird was wound up, it could sing one of the songs the real one sang, and it wagged its tail, which glittered with silver and gold. A ribbon was tied round its neck, on which was written, "The Emperor of Japan's nightingale is very poor compared to the Emperor of China's." Everybody said, "Oh, how beautiful!" And the person who brought the artificial bird immediately received the title of Imperial Nightingale Carrier-in-Chief. Now they must sing together. What a duet that will be! Then they had to sing together, but they did not get on very well, for the real nightingale sang in its own way, and the artificial one could only sing waltzes. "There is no fault in that," said the music master. "It is perfectly in time and correct in every way." Then the artificial bird had to sing alone. It was just as great a success as the real one. And then it was so much prettier to look at. It glittered like bracelets and breastpins. "That is the most delightful coquetting I have ever seen," said the ladies, and they took some water into their mouths to try and make the same gurgling, thinking so to equal the nightingale. It sang the same tune 33 times over, and yet it was not tired. People would willingly have heard it from the beginning again, but the emperor said that the real one must have a turn now. But where was it? No one had noticed that it had flown out of the open window back to its own green woods. "But what is the meaning of this?" said the emperor. All the courtiers railed at it and said it was a most ungrateful bird. "We have got the best bird, though," they said, and then the artificial bird had to sing again, and this was the 34th time that they heard the same tune, but they did not know it thoroughly even yet, because it was so difficult. The music master praised the bird tremendously, and insisted that it was much better than the real nightingale, not only as regarded to the outside with all the diamonds, but the inside too. "Because you see, my ladies and gentlemen, and the emperor before all, in the real nightingale you never know what you will hear, but in the artificial one everything is decided beforehand. So it is, and so it must remain. It can't be otherwise. You can account for things, you can open it and show the human ingenuity in arranging the waltzes, how they go, and how one note follows upon another." "Those are exactly my opinions," they all said, and the music master got leave to show the bird to the public next Sunday. They were also to hear it sing, said the emperor. So they heard it, and all became as enthusiastic over it as if they had drunk themselves merry on tea, because that is a thoroughly Chinese habit. Then they all said, "Oh," and struck their forefingers in the air and nodded their heads. But the poor fisherman, who had heard the real nightingale, said, "It sounds very nice, and is very like the real one, but there is something wanting. We don't know what." The real nightingale was banished from the kingdom. The artificial bird had its place on a silken cushion close to the emperor's bed. All the presents it had received of gold and precious jewels were scattered round it. Its title had risen to be Chief Imperial Singer of the Bedchamber, in rank number 1 on the left side, for the emperor reckoned that side the important one, where the heart was seated. And even an emperor's heart is on the left side. The music master wrote 25 volumes about the artificial bird. The treatise was very long and written in all the most difficult Chinese characters. Everyone said they had read and understood it, for otherwise they would have been reckoned stupid, and then their bodies would have been trampled upon. Things went on this way for a whole year. The emperor, the court, and all the other Chinamen knew every little gurgle in the song of the artificial bird by heart. But they liked it all the better for this, and they could all join in the song themselves. Even the street boys sang zee 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 and cluck cluck cluck, and the emperor sang it too. But one evening, when the bird was singing its best, and the emperor was lying in bed listening to it, something gave way inside the bird with a whizz, and then a spring burst. Whirr went all the wheels, and the music stopped. The emperor jumped out of bed and sent for his private physicians. But what good could they do? Then they sent for the watchmaker, and after a good deal of talk and examination, he got the works to go again somehow. But he said it would have to be saved as much as possible because it was so worn out, and he could not renew the works so as to be sure of the tune. This was a great blow. They only dared to let the artificial bird sing once a year, and hardly that. But then the music master made a little speech using all the most difficult words. He said it was just as good as ever, and his saying it made it so. 5 years now passed, and then a great grief came upon the nation, for they were all very fond of their emperor, and he was ill and could not live, it was said. A new emperor was already chosen, and people stood about in the street and asked the gentleman in waiting how their emperor was going on. "Pfft," answered he, shaking his head. The emperor lay pale and cold in his gorgeous bed. The courtiers thought he was dead, and they all went off to pay their respects to their new emperor. The lackeys ran off to talk matters over, and the chambermaids gave a great coffee party. Cloth had been laid down in all the rooms and corridors so as to deaden the sound of footsteps, so it was very, very quiet. But the emperor was not dead yet. He lay stiff and pale in the gorgeous bed with its velvet hangings and golden tassels. There was an open window high above him, and the moon streamed in upon the emperor and the artificial bird beside him. The poor emperor could hardly breathe. He seemed to have a weight on his chest. He opened his eyes, and then he saw that it was Death sitting upon his chest, wearing his golden crown. In one hand he held the emperor's golden sword, and in the other his imperial banner. Round about, from among the folds of the velvet hangings, peered many curious faces. Some were hideous, others gentle and pleasant. They were all the emperor's good and bad deeds, which now looked him in the face when death was weighing him down. "Do you remember that?" whispered one after the other. "Do you remember this?" And they told him so many things that perspiration poured down his face. "I never knew that," said the emperor. "Music, music, sound the great Chinese drums," he cried, "that I may not hear what they are saying." But they went on, and Death sat nodding his head, just like a Chinaman, at everything that was said. "Music, music!" shrieked the emperor. "You precious little golden birds, sing, sing! I have loaded you with precious stones and even hung my own golden slipper round your neck. Sing, I tell you, sing!" But the bird stood silent. There was nobody to wind it up, so of course it could not go. Death continued to fix the great empty sockets of his eyes upon him, and all was silent, so terribly silent. Suddenly, close to the window, there was a burst of lovely song. It was the living nightingale, perched on a branch outside. It had heard of the emperor's need and had come to bring comfort and hope to him. As it sang, the faces round became fainter and fainter, and the blood coursed with fresh vigor in the emperor's veins and through his feeble limbs. Even Death himself listened to the song and said, "Go on, little nightingale, go on." "Yes, if you give me the gorgeous golden sword. Yes, if you give me the imperial banner. Yes, if you give me the emperor's crown." And Death gave back each of these treasures for a song, and the nightingale went on singing. It sang about the quiet churchyard when the roses bloom, where the elderflower scents the air, and where the fresh grass is ever moistened anew by the tears of the mourner. This song brought to Death a longing for his own garden, and like a cold gray mist, he passed out of the window. "Thanks, thanks," said the emperor, "you heavenly little bird. I know you. I banished you from my kingdom, and yet you have charmed the evil visions away from my bed by your song, and even Death away from my heart. How can I ever repay you?" "You have rewarded me," said the nightingale. "I brought the tears to your eyes the very first time I ever sang to you, and I shall never forget it. Those are the jewels which gladden the heart of a singer. But sleep now, and wake up fresh and strong. I will sing to you." Then it sang again, and the emperor fell into a sweet, refreshing sleep. The sun shone at his window when he woke refreshed and well. None of his attendants had come back to him, for they thought he was dead. But the nightingale still sat there singing. "You must always stay with me," said the emperor. "You shall only sing when you like, and I will break the artificial bird into 1,000 pieces." "Don't do that," said the nightingale. "It did all the good it could. Keep it as you always have. I can't build my nest and live in this palace, but let me come whenever I like. Then I will sit on the branch in the evening and sing to you. I will sing to cheer you and to make you thoughtful too. I will sing to you of the happy ones and of those that suffer too. I will sing about the good and the evil which are kept hidden from you. The little singing bird flies far and wide, to the poor fisherman and the peasant's home, to numbers who are far from you and your court. I love your heart more than your crown, and yet there is an odor of sanctity round the crown too. I will come, and I will sing to you. But you must promise me one thing." "Everything," said the emperor, who stood there in his imperial robes, which he had just put on, and he held the sword heavy with gold upon his heart. "One thing I ask you. Tell no one that you have a little bird who tells you everything. It will be better so." Then the nightingale flew away. The attendants came in to see after their dead emperor, and there he stood, bidding them good morning. The End of The Nightingale by Hans Christian Andersen. Read by Sandra Estenson.
The Emperor's New Clothes by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Jedopi. The Emperor's New Clothes. Many years ago there was an emperor who was so excessively fond of new clothes that he spent all his money in dress. He did not trouble himself in the least about his soldiers, nor did he care to go either to the theatre or the chasse, except for the opportunities then afforded him for displaying his new clothes. He had a different suit for each hour of the day, and as of any other king or emperor one is accustomed to say, "He is sitting in council," it was also said of him, "The emperor is sitting in his wardrobe." Time passed merrily in the large town which was his capital. Strangers arrived every day at the court. One day 2 rogues, calling themselves weavers, made their appearance. They gave out that they knew how to weave stuffs of the most beautiful colors and elaborate patterns. The clothes manufactured from which should have the wonderful property of remaining invisible to everyone who was unfit for the office he held, or who was extraordinarily simple in character. "These must indeed be splendid clothes," thought the Emperor. "Had I such a suit I might at once find out what men in my realms are unfit for their office, and also be able to distinguish the wise from the foolish. This stuff must be woven for me immediately." And he caused large sums of money to be given to both the weavers in order that they might begin their work directly. So the 2 pretended weavers set up 2 looms and affected to work very busily, though in reality they did nothing at all. They asked for the most delicate silk and the purest gold thread, put both into their own knapsacks, and then continued their pretended work at the empty looms until late at night. "I should like to know how the weavers are getting on with my cloth," said the Emperor to himself, after some little time had elapsed. He was, however, rather embarrassed when he remembered that a simpleton, or one unfit for his office, would be able to see the manufacture. To be sure, he thought he had nothing to risk in his own person, but yet he would prefer sending somebody else to bring him intelligence about the weavers and their work, before he troubled himself in the affair. All the people throughout the city had heard of the wonderful property the cloth was to possess, and all were anxious to learn how wise or how ignorant their neighbors might prove to be. "I will send my faithful old minister to the weavers," said the Emperor at last, after some deliberation. "He will be best able to see how the cloth looks, for he is a man of sense, and no one can be more suitable for his office than he is." So the faithful old minister went into the hall, where the knaves were working with all their might at their empty looms. "What can be the meaning of this?" thought the old man, opening his eyes very wide. "I cannot discover the least bit of thread on the looms." However, he did not express his thoughts aloud. The impostors requested him very courteously to be so good as to come nearer their looms, and then asked him whether the design pleased him, and whether the colors were not very beautiful, at the same time pointing to the empty frames. The poor old minister looked and looked. He could not discover anything on the looms, for a very good reason, viz., there was nothing there. "What!" thought he again. "Is it possible that I am a simpleton? I have never thought so myself, and no one must know it now, if I am so. Can it be that I'm unfit for my office? No, that must not be said either. I will never confess that I could not see the stuff." "Well, Sir Minister," said one of the knaves, still pretending to work, "you do not say whether the stuff pleases you." "Oh, it is excellent," replied the old minister, looking at the loom through his spectacles. "This pattern and the colors, yes, I will tell the Emperor without delay. How very beautiful I think them!" "We shall be much obliged to you," said the impostors, and then they named the different colors and described the pattern of the pretended stuff. The old minister listened attentively to their words, in order that he might repeat them to the Emperor, and then the knaves asked for more silk and gold, saying that it was necessary to complete what they had begun. However, they put all that was given them into their knapsacks, and continued to work with as much apparent diligence as before at their empty looms. The Emperor now sent another officer of his court to see how the men were getting on, and to ascertain whether the cloth would soon be ready. It was just the same with this gentleman as with the minister. He surveyed the looms on all sides, but could see nothing at all but the empty frames. "Does not the stuff appear as beautiful to you as it did to my lord the minister?" asked the impostors of the Emperor's second ambassador, at the same time making the same gestures as before, and talking of the design and colors which were not there. "I certainly am not stupid," thought the messenger. "It must be that I am not fit for my good, profitable office. That is very odd. However, no one shall know anything about it." And accordingly he praised the stuff he could not see, and declared that he was delighted with both colors and patterns. "Indeed, please your Imperial Majesty," said he to his sovereign when he returned, "the cloth which the weavers are preparing is extraordinarily magnificent." The whole city was talking of the splendid cloth which the Emperor had ordered to be woven at his own expense. And now the Emperor himself wished to see the costly manufacture while it was still in the loom. Accompanied by a select number of officers of the court, among whom were the two honest men who had already admired the cloth, he went to the crafty impostors, who, as soon as they were aware of the Emperor's approach, went on working more diligently than ever, although they still did not pass a single thread through the looms. "Is not the work absolutely magnificent?" said the two officers of the crown, already mentioned. "If your Majesty will only be pleased to look at it, what a splendid design! What glorious colors!" And at the same time they pointed to the empty frames, for they imagined that everyone else could see this exquisite piece of workmanship. "How is this?" said the Emperor to himself. "I can see nothing. This is indeed a terrible affair. Am I a simpleton? Or am I unfit to be an emperor? That would be the worst thing that could happen. Oh, the cloth is charming," said he aloud. "It has my complete approbation." And he smiled most graciously, and looked closely at the empty looms, for on no account would he say that he could not see what two of the officers of his court had praised so much. All his retinue now strained their eyes, hoping to discover something on the looms, but they could see no more than the others. Nevertheless, they all exclaimed, "Oh, how beautiful!" and advised His Majesty to have some new clothes made from this splendid material for the approaching procession. "Magnificent! Charming! Excellent!" resounded on all sides, and everyone was uncommonly gay. The Emperor shared in the general satisfaction, and presented the impostors with the riband of an order of knighthood, to be worn in their buttonholes, and the title of Gentlemen Weavers. The rogues sat up the whole of the night before the day on which the procession was to take place, and had 16 lights burning, so that everyone might see how anxious they were to finish the Emperor's new suit. They pretended to roll the cloth off the looms, cut the air with their scissors, and sewed with needles without any thread in them. "See," cried they at last, "the Emperor's new clothes are ready." And now the Emperor, with all the grandees of his court, came to the weavers, and the rogues raised their arms, as if in the act of holding something up, saying, "Here are your Majesty's trousers. Here is the scarf. Here is the mantle. The whole suit is as light as a cobweb. One might fancy one has nothing at all on, when dressed in it. That, however, is the great virtue of this delicate cloth." "Yes, indeed," said all the courtiers, although not one of them could see anything of this exquisite manufacture. "If your Imperial Majesty will be graciously pleased to take off your clothes, we will fit on the new suit, in front of the looking-glass." The Emperor was accordingly undressed, and the rogues pretended to array him in his new suit, the Emperor turning round from side to side before the looking-glass. "How splendid His Majesty looks in his new clothes, and how well they fit!" everyone cried out. "What a design! What colors! These are indeed royal robes." "The canopy which is to be borne over your Majesty in the procession is waiting," announced the chief master of the ceremonies. "I am quite ready," answered the Emperor. "Do my new clothes fit well?" asked he, turning himself around again before the looking-glass, in order that he might appear to be examining his handsome suit. The lords of the bedchamber, who were to carry His Majesty's train, felt about on the ground, as if they were lifting up the ends of the mantle, and pretended to be carrying something, for they would by no means betray anything like simplicity or unfitness for their office. So now the Emperor walked under his high canopy, in the midst of the procession, through the streets of his capital, and all the people standing by, and those at the windows, cried out, "Oh, how beautiful are our Emperor's new clothes! What a magnificent train there is to the mantle! And how gracefully the scarf hangs!" In short, no one would allow that he could not see these much admired clothes, because, in doing so, he would have declared himself either a simpleton or unfit for his office. Certainly none of the Emperor's various suits had ever made so great an impression as these invisible ones. "But the Emperor has nothing at all on," said a little child. "Listen to the voice of innocence!" exclaimed his father, and what the child had said was whispered from one to another. "But he has nothing at all on!" at last cried out all the people. The Emperor was vexed, for he knew that the people were right, but he thought the procession must go on now, and the lords of the bedchamber took greater pains than ever to appear holding up a train, although in reality there was no train to hold. End of The Emperor's New Clothes. Recording by Jedopi. www.publicdomainaudiobooks.blogspot.com